This is a wild encounter that happened to me last year. At the moment, I wasn't so scared, but as I told people the story afterward is when I started to realize how scary and horrific this encounter could have been. One thing my wife and I love to do is hit up garage sales to try to find awesome stuff for cheap. I'm the king of bargains, and I often can't pass them up. I'm left-handed, and one time I got a brand new set of left-handed golf clubs for $30 because the guy was having surgery and wasn't going to be able to golf anymore, and that's the type of deals I hunt for. Well, last year in the middle of the summer while my wife and I were garage sale hunting, I found what I thought was an estate sale. A fairly large house in my neighborhood was selling just about everything you can think of from the house. The couple running the sale was probably in their mid-30s if I had to guess. I got talking to the guy and I found out that it wasn't an estate sale technically, but there was just about everything being sold in that house at that time. The house belonged to the guy's father, who was still alive and sitting in a chair next to the garage. The man explained to us that his father was losing it mentally and that he was going to be living with him. They planned on keeping the house but wanted to get rid of most of the stuff inside so they could renovate it and then have a house they could rent out. Most of the stuff in the garage was just junk. Years' worth of clutter that old people tend to accumulate. Then I saw something that caught my eye. It was a really cool military sword. It was engraved with all sorts of writing, had an eagle for the handle, and to cap it off, it looked like it was solid gold. Whether it was or wasn't real gold, I didn't know at the time. I grabbed the sword and asked the man if this was truly for sale, and the guy shrugged it off and said, "Yeah, I'll sell it to you for $25. I gave him $30 and walked away with my new shiny toy. As I was walking to my car with my wife, I happened to look up and see the old man was now standing up. He looked concerned and almost angry. As I was driving away, I saw the old man walk over to his son and he appeared to be yelling at him. The son just kept putting his hands up in the air while the old guy was yelling. I was curious as to what they were fighting about, but ultimately I just forgot about it in minutes. That night when we got home, we were sitting in the backyard grilling some steaks. I was telling a couple of neighbors that came over about the sword, and it was only a matter of time until I went inside and grabbed it so I could show it off to my buddies. The night continued, and we ate our steaks outside and continued hanging out and enjoying the evening. Around 8 p.m. that night, one of my friends said that he thought that he had heard someone knocking on my front door. I didn't put any stock into that because we were out back and I figured that there was no way that my friend could have heard that. Not 5 minutes later, I heard my wife scream at the top of her lungs. We all turned around and, storming into my backyard, was the old man from the garage sale. He wasn't limping or moving sluggishly. He came back there like a bat out of hell and was making a shot for the sword, which was next to the table in the patio. I started to approach the man calmly, telling him to just hold on and relax, and he didn't listen to me at all. He grabbed the sword, and I kid you not, he took a swing. Thankfully, he's older and a weaker man, so I was able to just move out of the way, but the man was screaming erratically and claiming that I stole his sword. For some reason, I was still trying to plead with the guy, even though he was trying to stab me. I finally had enough and tackled this guy to the ground. I tried to do it gently because I was scared I was going to break the guy in half or something. I was trying to figure out in my head how this guy knew where I lived, and I had no idea. My wife called the police, who showed up pretty quickly, and right away the old man started telling them that I stole his sword. I was able to calmly explain to the police that I had bought it at a garage sale and that they could contact the man that I bought it from. It took a while, but the son was finally notified and he came rushing over. He must have apologized a million times, and I didn't press charges. The old man clearly wasn't there mentally. Perhaps the most terrifying part was when me, the son, and the cop were talking, the old man snuck over and grabbed the sword. My wife just happened to see him grab it, and she pointed it out right away. I still think to myself, what would that man have done if my wife didn't see him pick up the sword? Would he have tried to use it again? I exchanged numbers with the son just in case I had to reach out to him again, and I became more vigilant of all my locks in the house. I never did give the sword back, and my conscience sort of eats at me for that one. Now in hindsight, I should have just given the sword back and just bought it from the son when the old man died, but I was thinking in the moment. and as of writing this, I still don't know if the man is alive. The only thing I can say for sure is that since that horrible evening in the backyard, I have yet to see that crazy old man again. Ever since I was a little kid, I've loved going to garage sales and estate sales. We didn't have a lot of money growing up, and garage sales were a place that I could find toys or books at prices my parents could afford to pay. As I got older, I just became extremely fascinated with what other people had in their collections and what they were selling. I found everything from vintage Disney snow globes to stamps dating back almost 100 years. Anyway, for the last 7 to 8 years, myself and a few of my neighbors started a neighborhood garage sale. It started really small, but now I'd say about 50% of the neighborhood participates, and other communities drive in to shop at the garage sale. My husband is a collector of many things, so we usually have at least a few good items that we sell for cheap just to get them out of the house. We have a few regulars who come to our sale every year and will grab whatever furniture or large items that we have for sale that year. The story I'm going to share with you now took place 3 years ago in July during our neighborhood sale. In our postings in the newspaper and on social media, we give the hours and the days of the sales. We specifically ask for no early birds because people are usually still setting up their yard sales, before 8 a.m. I usually have everything out in the garage the night before and just drag it out to the driveway the next day. I remember my husband was up having some coffee as he had to work that Saturday. Luckily, his job is work from home, so he just uses his office in the basement. He asked if I needed any help setting up, and I said I was just moving a few tables, but we had some time and he should finish his coffee. At around 7 a.m., I heard a slamming on the door. Yes, a slamming, like somebody was trying to break through the door. I ran to the door and whipped it open and said, "Can I help you?" It was a middle-aged man who replies, "Yeah, I'm here for the sale. It said you had collectibles." And I said, "Yes, I believe we do have some. They're my husband's, but the sale doesn't start for another hour." Now annoyed, he says, "Well, I'm here now, so why don't you just let me look around?" I tried to remain calm and friendly and said, "We aren't quite set up yet, but we do open up at 8 a.m. A big frown came across his face, and he turned around and said that you didn't have to be rude about it. I thought about yelling something back, but figured that I would just let it go. He got into a rusty maroon pickup truck and just drove off. My husband asked who it was. I'm sure I said some sarcastic comment about someone pounding on the door, and him letting me answer it alone and not even coming over to check. The sale started and was busy, as it always is. I was struggling to keep up with the customers early on, but at about 10 a.m., there was a little break in the rush. I put my head down to check my phone and heard someone say, "Hey, how are you?" And to my surprise, it was the same guy from the morning, who seemed to be chipper as ever and completely ignoring our interaction from earlier. He gave me a wide smile that exposed his mouth, which looked like it had a total of 4 teeth. He browsed the collectibles for quite some time and brought up a few baseball cards and checked out. He thanked me and asked if there was anything else for sale, and I said, "Nope, this is it." He said that I was just wondering if maybe you had any more cards or DVDs inside. I told him I could check with my husband and there could potentially be more tomorrow, but for today, this was it. He didn't say anything, just turned around and left. I took a little break around lunchtime to have lunch with my husband. We both ate at the garage while he was on his break. There were a few people browsing, but not many purchases. And that's when I saw the maroon pickup truck pull up in front of the house for the 3rd time today. I leaned over to my husband and said, "This guy's been here twice already, and he was the one banging on the door at 7 a.m. He approached both of us and said, "I was here earlier, and I think you said that there was going to be some more stuff here." I looked at my husband and back at him and said, "That's not the case. My husband's put everything out there for sale, and after checking with him, there won't be anything near or new for tomorrow." The same frown from earlier in the morning was back on his face. He looked at my husband and said, can I take a look around inside? I bet you got lots of stuff in there, and I could probably put a good offer on it. My husband said that this is it, that he doesn't have anything else for sale. And now with his big smile on his face, he said, "Are you sure?" My husband cut him off and said, "Listen, that's all we have. I appreciate you stopping by, but if there is anything else you're interested in, I'm sure there are plenty of other sales that might have what you need." And the man nodded, spun around, and got into his truck and left. The rest of the night went off with no issues, and my husband and I made a nice chunk of change for a single-day sale. We honestly did so well that we decided to cancel our second day. I thought that I would stop by a few of my neighbors' houses who still had a lot of stuff and help them for the day. At about 7:15 on Saturday, I went over to Debbie's, and strangely, I noticed her garage was closed and that she wasn't setting anything up yet. She told me to come over at 7, but I came a little late just in case it was too early. After contemplating if I should just go back home or not, I went to the front door. Before I even had a chance to knock, Debbie opened the door in her robe, clutching tissues with her face all red. "What happened?" I asked her. And she said someone came and broke into the garage and took most of her stuff, at least some of the valuable items. Debbie told me to come in and told me the entire story. She was running through it, and I cut her off at one point and said, "Can you repeat that?" And she said the only thing that her husband caught when he was running outside was a red pickup truck racing down the street, just fast enough that he wasn't able to get a license plate. I asked if the pickup truck was red and rusty, and her husband overheard and said, "How did you know that?" I told Debbie and her husband about my encounter the day before, and they asked if I would share a description and any other information with the police. Of course I agreed, but from what I recall, no one was ever charged, and they weren't able to get their belongings back. I know some of you may not think that this post qualifies as a scary encounter, but having the feeling that in your own neighborhood or your own house, you no longer may be safe is one of the rawest fears there is in the world. I still get sick to my stomach when I think about this story and have since installed new security systems and cameras around our property. I still do love garage sailing, but since this event 3 years ago, I only shop and I don't host. Sometimes I just think I have bad luck. I'm almost 30 years old and I can't seem to find myself a nice partner to settle down with. I've gone on a million dates. I've tried the whole Tinder thing, and I'd even had friends set me up on blind dates, and I just can't seem to find that special connection with anyone, no matter how hard I try. The story I'm about to tell you happened to me a few years ago, and I don't know if it was just desperation or just plain bad luck, but it still haunts me to this day. It started on a beautiful summer day. I happened to be off from work on a Saturday, which never happens, and I decided to try and make the most of it. I had recently moved to a new neighborhood a few months prior to the events of this story and was excited to see that my neighbor was having a bunch of yard sales. Because I usually worked on Saturdays, I always tend to miss the yard sales, so the fact that I could actually check them out on this specific Saturday, I was thrilled. I hit a few houses on my street that weren't really selling anything worthwhile. As I continued to make my way through the neighborhood, I found a couple of little treasures. One house that I stopped at was selling a bunch of guitars and drum sets. Since I play guitar, I was interested right away. I grabbed this lime green acoustic guitar the guy was selling, and while I was inspecting the instrument, I heard this voice behind me say, "Hey, sweet guitar, you play?" I turned around and said yes at the same time. What I didn't expect to see was a beautiful woman smiling at me, and she was completely my type. She was dressed in a punk rock style, covered in tattoos, and most notably, she had green hair. I'm not one to engage with people so easily, but she had a certain charm about her that I was sucked right into her gaze. We ended up making small talk for nearly half an hour at this poor guy's yard sale, and finally the guy said that I had to either buy the guitar or leave since I had been holding it the entire time me and this girl had been talking. I told her it was nice meeting her and then went and paid the guy. I remember walking home with the guitar in my hand, kind of beating myself up that I didn't get her number. I didn't even get her name. And then I remember feeling this rush of joy, because from several feet behind me, I heard her voice. She was asking me to stop, and when I did, she ran over and grabbed my hand and said, "I know this sounds crazy, but I really like talking to you. We had a connection, and I think it would be crazy if we both ignored it. Would you maybe want to hang out?" I was so excited, but I was trying to play it cool. I remember laughing and telling her my name, to which she replied with hers. She said her name was Moon. Yes, it was Moon. And we joked and continued our small talk again for another few minutes. I eventually worked up the courage to ask her out for a drink, and I guess I shouldn't have been surprised when she said yes. We went to a local bar, shared a few drinks, and then one thing led to another, and I asked her to come back to my place, and again, she went with it. We had an amazing night. We stayed up for a while, playing Mario Party, and then ended the night on a high note. I went to bed in probably one of the best moods I had ever been in. That quickly changed when I woke up at around 4 in the morning. I noticed that she wasn't lying next to me anymore. I sat up in bed and noticed that my bedroom door was shut, which I never shut my door. I snuck over to the door and opened it slowly, and I thought that I could hear the sound of breaking glass coming from downstairs. I was still groggy from waking up, so I wasn't moving too fast. As I was going down the stairs, I shouted Moon's name, and before I went all the way downstairs, I heard her yell something under her breath, and then heard the back door slam. I finally started to move with some pace, and that's when I noticed that I was too late. My kitchen was completely destroyed. There was glass everywhere. I started to freak out, and then my anger turned to sadness. This woman had not only trashed my kitchen, but she also robbed me blind. All my records were gone, and 2 of my guitars were gone as well. I had a china cabinet that had a bunch of my family heirlooms, and all of that was gone. She had taken everything that I had of real value, and I ran out the back door trying to find her. My logic was telling me that there was no way that she could have carried all that stuff out, but when I got outside, she was nowhere to be found. And reality started to set in, and I realized how hard I had been played. Clearly, this woman had a plan all along, and she had to have someone else with her because she would never have been able to get away so fast. I obviously reported this incident to the police, but there was nothing that ever came of it. I could describe her appearance, but nobody matching her description was ever caught. Moon must have just been some fake name because nobody in the area had the name Moon. And when I reflect on this now, years later, I can notice some red flags. Like, where did she come from that day? I never bothered to ask. She didn't drive a car, so I guess I assumed she lived in the neighborhood. She was dependent on me the entire evening, and instead of looking at this as some type of issue, I was more into the idea that she needed me. I never did get my stuff back, and now I'm ever more careful and selective with whom I bring into my home. And be careful, because sometimes the people we're closest with, the people we trust, can be the monsters that are right under our noses the entire time. I'd like to say that some men are just creeps, but honestly some people in general are just creeps as well. When my husband was out of town for his job, I decided to have a garage sale with my mom and 2 sisters. We all lived relatively close, so we just had the yard sale at my house since I had a really big front yard. None of us were selling anything that was really that exciting, just a bunch of extra stuff that we had all collected over the years. About an hour into the sale, a normal-looking guy approached me and didn't have anything in his hands to buy. I asked if I could help him, to which he replied in this sort of calm voice saying, "No." The interaction was weird, but seemed harmless. I dismissed it somehow. I can't remember exactly what I said and walked away. Not 2 minutes later, the man approached me again. I had my back turned to him, but I could feel him walking up behind me. Instead of turning and saying anything, the man said, "Hello, dear. You have the most amazing eyes." I turned and gave the guy this half smile as I thanked him, and I continued to walk around just trying to distance myself from this creep. I sort of felt bad for a minute because what if this guy was just genuinely trying to be nice and I was being as cold as can be? When he approached me the third time, he had some shirts or something in his hands and he says, "I'm sorry I was so blunt earlier. I hope I didn't offend you." I smiled and apologized for my cold demeanor, and I told him that it was all right and that I didn't mind the compliment. That was my mistake. I gave the guy an inch and he took a mile, and he immediately said, "Oh, okay, good. Well, we should go out sometime." I was pretty floored by the statement, and I told him that I was married and I wasn't interested. He then started to beg me, saying things like, "Forget about your husband. I'm a real man." And my personal favorite, "What even is marriage? It's just a fancy word." Now I was angry and annoyed, and I told the man that he needed to leave right now. He got angry and upset and tried to play this victim card, but he left after a minute or two. About an hour later, a pretty woman came up to me with a huge smile on her face, saying, "Hello, dear. You have the most amazing eyes." I looked at her with a little disgust because she said exactly what the other guy said no more than an hour earlier. I thanked her, and after an awkward pause, I asked if she needed any help, and she just continued to look at me and said, "You really are beautiful. I think you should forget about your husband and let me and Zachary come over." Well, this told me two things right away. One, this woman was with the creep from earlier, and two, that creep's name is Zach. I won't write exactly what I said, but let's just say that I said some not-so-nice words to the woman. She left, and the rest of the afternoon went by with no issues. I felt like I was looking over my shoulder every 2 seconds, though. Every time someone cleared their throat or something like that, I thought Zachary or his female companion were behind me. My sisters and I cleaned everything up, and I ended up going to one of my sister's houses for dinner. I had a bad feeling, and I just felt more comfortable with being with them since my husband wasn't home. We ended up having a classic night together, a night we sisters hadn't shared in a long time. We drank a bottle of wine, or maybe two, I can't remember, and just laughed all night long. At around midnight, my sister asked her husband to drive me home since he hadn't drank anything, and I wasn't in the right mind to drive my own car. The drive was only about 3 minutes from driveway to driveway, and if we had left 30 seconds later, my night may have ended much differently. As we were driving down the road, my brother-in-law said, "What? Is someone home at your house?" I sat up in my seat and noticed that the garage door was open. Not the overhead door, but the normal one. The garage had a normal door that I kept locked 99% of the time. He pulled to the bottom of the driveway but told me not to get out yet. We couldn't have been sitting for more than 10 seconds when all of a sudden a light on the inside of the house turned on. The bright light in the living room was illuminating the front of the house. I didn't take any chances. I immediately called the police, and my brother-in-law stayed right with me until they showed up. It took about 5 minutes for them to show up, and during that time, we watched these intruders turn on every single light in the house. When the cops finally did come, they must have seen the flashing lights because they ran out of the garage door as fast as they could. 2 officers chased them, and another officer came over to talk to me. A few minutes passed, and the cops came back, and they were unsuccessful in their foot chase. When they ran out of the house, it was easy to see that the 2 intruders were the woman from earlier, and that creep as well. I told the cops everything I could think of with their descriptions. I went inside with my brother-in-law, and they didn't take anything. All they did was smash our wedding picture, and that was it. Everything else seemed untouched, which made this all the more confusing. I had no idea who these people were or what they wanted from me. I slept at my sister's house until my husband came home from his trip, and the next day I installed several cameras around the house. Thankfully, those 2 never came back, and I truly hope that whatever they wanted that evening remains a mystery for the foreseeable future. So this just happened to me a few weeks ago, and I still can't really believe it. It just seems surreal to me that some people out there are just plain evil, and there really isn't any rhyme or reason for their actions. As I said, this was only a few weeks ago, and my family and I had a yard sale to kind of purge away a lot of the unnecessary clutter and just stuff we don't need anymore. For the most part, everything was fine. A couple of minor hiccups, but nothing really crazy. At some point during the day, I noticed a strange older man. The guy was at least in his 60s, and honestly, he was probably much older. He was browsing the yard sale like everyone else, but I noticed him right away. He stuck out like a sore thumb. He was bald on top, but had this wild white hair that shot out on each side. To give you a real mental image, he kind of looked like Albert Einstein, except he was really dirty looking. I try not to judge a book by its cover, but something was just off about this guy. After a few minutes of browsing, but not particularly looking at anything, I started to keep my eye on him. And that's when I noticed his weird behavior. It became clear to me that he wasn't looking at anything, and he was actually looking at my house. He looked down at something that I had on the table, and then slowly he would just look up and examine my house again. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but then I noticed it again and again. I tried not to let my imagination run wild, but it was really hard to ignore. Things started getting busy, and I lost my focus on the guy for a few minutes. When I finally regained my focus and located this dude, he was near my front bar window, and he appeared to be looking inside. I decided that this was enough, and I confronted him. I told him that he was too close to my house and that he needed to leave if he wasn't going to buy anything. He just looked at me with this really unsettling blank expression, and then he turned around and walked away. He left my yard sale and walked down the street, but he ended up standing at the end of the street for several minutes. I would regularly look up, and when I did, the strange man was still standing there. Finally, after I don't know how long, I didn't see him anymore. I eventually forgot about him, and the rest of the day continued with no issues. That night, I was telling my girlfriend about the weird guy, and she jumped up right away and claimed that she knew exactly who I was talking about. She told me that she had noticed him too and that he was creeping her out, which isn't surprising. She told me that when she helped an older woman bring a chair to her car, when she was walking back, she saw him walking on the side of the house. She was confused at that moment, but forgot about it not long after. She just assumed that he was lost and kind of wandering. She didn't think it was harmful in any way, as weird as it was, and we talked a little more that night and decided to go to bed. I ended up double-checking all of the locks one last time before bed, just in case. At 2 in the morning, my girlfriend and I were both jolted awake by the same noise. It was the sound of a loud bang, followed by screaming, and it sounded like it was right outside our window. She clenched the blanket as I got up to look out the window. I saw my neighbor chasing someone down the street with what appeared to be something in their hand, probably a baseball bat, and my neighbor was screaming, and the memory of him screaming to call 911 is still burned into my head. I ran outside to make sure that he was all right, and by the time I got there, he was already walking back, huffing and puffing. A minute or two after he walked back over, the cops pulled up. My neighbor called them over, and I was standing next to my neighbor. I thought I was being supportive of my neighbor at the time, but little did I know that he was going to drop the ultimate nightmare on me. I thought that my neighbor had caught some type of potential intruder, but what he said was much worse. My neighbor was talking to the officer, and he says, "I was sitting in my garage smoking a cigarette, and then I noticed the floodlight across the street turn on. Being nosy, I looked up, and I saw a man trying to break into that window right there." I felt like throwing up because he pointed right at my bedroom window. I immediately dropped back and asked him to clarify. After confirming that he meant my house, I fell to my knee. I was so thankful to have a nosy neighbor at that moment. My neighbor gave the officer a description of the man, and this night just kept getting worse. Just like I said earlier, he described the guy as Albert Einstein looking. I then told the officer about the man's weird behavior earlier at the yard sale. The police took both of our statements and then went on with their night. As of me writing this account, they still haven't caught the guy. My girlfriend and I both barely sleep anymore. Every noise I hear outside now causes me to jump out of my skin. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I find myself sitting in the garage, waiting for him to walk by again. I'm planning on proposing to my girlfriend soon, and after that, we'll be moving out of this neighborhood for good. I'm worried that I may not get a decent night's sleep as long as I'm still living in that house. I don't know how truly scary this story is, but it was definitely unsettling and really freaked my boyfriend and me out for months. It happened last year, right around this time. Our lease was up in our apartment, and we were moving into a house together for the first time. It was sort of a perfect situation. His parents were retiring and moving to Florida, and they were basically letting us move into the house and rent it for the price of the mortgage. It was perfect. Before moving in, his parents were selling most of their stuff, and the stuff that was left over, they decided to have a huge yard sale. Since we wanted to buy all new furniture for technically our first house, we didn't want any of the old furniture that was currently in the house. The yard sale was a 3-day event where we sold literally everything, anything from pillowcases to Pokemon cards. On the 3rd day, a strange couple approached my boyfriend and me who were sitting at one of the tables collecting money, and in a chipper and excited voice he asked me, "Excuse me, but do you have any sacred or haunted items?" I kind of started to giggle because I truly thought this guy was joking. After my little laughing episode, I noticed that he was still looking directly at me, completely stone-faced. And then he says, "I'm serious. Any haunted items? I'm what you might call a collector." The woman he was with looked like she was dressed right from the movie Beetlejuice, and the guy was wearing a very tight royal blue suit. I swear to you, he started to basically sing about his haunted collection, and I was ready for some hidden camera crew to come out at any moment and tell me that I was being punked. I couldn't contain my laughter anymore, and I just finally broke. He stopped his weird little rant and looked upset at my laughter, and then he looked around and noticed that a couple of people there were also kind of smirking at him. In a very mean and condescending way that I now regret, I basically told him to just get lost because I didn't have any haunted items, and I really drove home the point that hauntings aren't real. Now, sidebar to anybody reading this, sorry, but ghosts aren't real. Anyway, back to this freak. So I felt terrible about basically making fun of this guy and causing a bunch of people to laugh at him in addition to me. He and his girlfriend got into their red car. I couldn't tell what type of car it was, and they drove off. We all continued to laugh and joke around for a little bit, but eventually, it just became old news. It wasn't until the yard sale was almost over that I noticed a red car kept driving by every few minutes. It would slow down for a bit and then speed up past the house. I pointed it out to my boyfriend, but he instantly told me that I was being paranoid, which maybe I was. Red cars are common after all. It was just weird that it kept happening so frequently. He told me that I probably had a guilty conscience, and my mind was tricking me into thinking that I was seeing something that I really wasn't seeing. That night when we were cleaning up, I noticed a red car parked on the road a few houses up. I know for some people reading this, that isn't that alarming, but this was a very quiet, secluded street, and we all knew each other, and I knew nobody on my street drove a red car, especially one that looked like that. I kept an eye on it all night, and the car never moved. This was the first night my boyfriend and I were going to stay overnight, and I decided to take the dog out on a walk at around 11 that night. Against my better judgment, I walked by the car that night. Inside, I saw a blue suit jacket, but no people. The jacket alone made my heart beat faster. I didn't know where these people were, and if they were around, did they mean us any harm? I ran back to the house and made my boyfriend check every lock on the door, and I even made him check that all the windows were locked as well. I didn't sleep at all that first night, maybe because it was a new house, but something was telling me that I was in danger. All night long, I kept getting out of bed and checking that red car, that it was still parked in the road, and all night, the car stayed there. Around 3:30 or so, I looked out the window and I saw that the taillights were on. I remember freaking out, and even though nothing was happening, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I saw the woman from earlier run from the side of a house and get in the car, and then they just peeled off. I waited all night, and it wasn't until about 6 a.m. the car drove by again. I know because I was staring out the window the entire night like some creep. The little red car stopped in front of the house, and then after a minute or two, it drove off into the night for the last night. And that was the last time I ever saw the red car or anybody even closely resembling those two freaks that I saw earlier at the yard sale. I told you, the story isn't incredibly scary, but it's very weird and very unnerving, and it just doesn't really make any sense. And what do you think? Were these two just strange and eccentric individuals, or were they contemplating something much worse and got scared? Obviously, I never reported this to the police because what is there to report? Nothing technically happened, and honestly, I'm the jerk of this story over anybody else. It's been a year, and I haven't seen them again, and I just hope it stays that way for as long as we live in this house. Back in 2014, I moved to a beautiful town in the northeastern United States. It was just quiet enough for me, and I couldn't wait to start my new life here. I had just started seeing someone a few weeks prior to this happening, but we weren't living together at this time of the story, so I was alone most nights, which I didn't mind at the time. When I started seeing my new girlfriend, she made it clear to me that we couldn't sit and blow up Stone Cold Steve Austin furniture anymore, and I needed to find real furniture. And I hate to say it, but she was right. I found a lot of stuff at the thrift store, but garage sales were where I was furnishing my entire house. Lamps, tables, couches, you name it, I was buying. One Saturday afternoon when I was looking for kitchen stuff, I met this one guy who was selling some really cool stuff. It wasn't your typical garage sale junk. He had weird statues and all these relics from different religions. He told me that he and his son used to collect artifacts from all over the world, and they were fascinated by different cultures and ideas. I was truly just interested in his stories. He went on to tell me that his son took a job in Japan and that he wasn't coming back anytime soon. He told me that his son said it was okay to sell all the stuff since it was probably worthless. Either way, the stuff was awesome, and I was totally willing to buy some of this junk for cheap. I'm a collector of weird oddities myself, so to be able to get some more weird stuff to throw on my bookshelf was something I couldn't pass up. I grabbed some rocks from some ancient city I forgot the name of and some ancient Babylonian statues that the guy assured me were just replicas, but my guests don't have to know that. As he was laying out some more relics, some older woman came over and almost flipped the table. She started to claim that the symbols on one of the rocks were cursed and against her religion. I told her to relax and that the rocks were fake, but she wasn't having it. This woman was probably like 75 years old, and she got so nervous that she actually started to cry. I gestured to the guy to put the stuff away and that I would come back later to take a look at them, and that's exactly what I did. But in the meantime, I walked the woman to her car and made sure that she was all right. I even apologized for buying the allegedly cursed items, and I lied to her and just told her that I even returned them. I ended up spending almost $70, but I bought almost all the weird relics and occult items that this guy had. When I got home, I decorated my whole house with them. I was pleased and quite happy with my day of garage sale hunting. I was talking to my girlfriend that night on the phone, who was happy for me, but gave me a piece of her mind about buying more junk that I didn't need, and again, she was right. We ended up talking on the phone for a long time that night. Before I knew it, it was after midnight and I was ready for bed. We were still on the phone, and as I was getting into bed, I heard the sound of a door shut. Now, without hanging up, I told her that I was going to go check it out, even though she told me not to. I'm sure that it was probably just the wind or air pressure slamming the basement door or something, even though that really hasn't happened before, but I guess it could have been the first time. I remember while I was walking down the upstairs hallway, my girlfriend was convinced that these items were cursed, and I just remember specifically laughing out loud at that. And when I got to the bottom of the stairs, I could hear a voice coming from around the corner. While on the phone with my girlfriend, I texted her and said to please just call 911, and I heard a voice coming from my living room. The voice was soft and gentle, I guess, and it was clearly some older woman's voice, and she just kept muttering, "No, no, no, no." I instantly remembered the old woman from the garage sale earlier that day. There's no way, I thought. And I finally worked up the courage to peek around the corner, and I couldn't believe my eyes. The woman was kneeling down in front of my bookcase, rocking back and forth, repeatedly saying no. I didn't engage with her and figured that I would just let the police deal with it. I just hoped that they would show up soon, though. Thankfully, the police showed up in about 2 minutes. They came up and, in a very calm and professional way, they apprehended the woman who became erratic, claiming that my house was cursed and that she was trying to just bless my home. I thanked her, but trust me when I tell you I had those cops take her out of my house. I found out after the fact that the woman was just not mentally all there. She was diagnosed with some laundry list worth of things, and the fact that she was still out there driving in her mental state is what's truly horrifying. It's also sad, but she didn't have any family or friends, and this poor woman was just apparently alone in the world. I don't know what happened to her after this, and it wouldn't surprise me one bit if she's still alive and kicking. I'm so thankful that my girlfriend called the police that night because it gives me chills thinking about what could have happened if I didn't act when I did. This isn't important, but I think it's worth noting. That girlfriend in the story is now my wife, and still to this day, I have all these weird statues and stuff all over my house. So if I am cursed, I'm still waiting for the bad luck.